Good morning. This is Darren from SimNation. Just want to do a quick video to kind of recap the season so far in the SNCFL. This, of course, is our Draft Day Sports College Football 2023 League here at SimNation. Draft Day Sports College Football, of course, is one of the titles from Wolverine Studios. Highly suggest you check it out. It is a really good game to play, whether you're playing single or online. And of course, if you want to play online with a bunch of other like-minded coaches, I would just say take a look at SNCFL. It is a great league. We've got a whole bunch of new owners, uh, but we still have some really good teams that are available. So, yeah, the season started. We're now through week 3. Generally, we run 3 sims a week. So that's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Normally try to do these on Sundays, so that way I have the Saturday results in and I don't feel like I'm rushing it. But it's an interesting season so far. There were a couple of things that I would not have expected to see happening, and there were some things I would not have expected to see happening. Um, so the format I'm going to kind of take with this is I'm going to talk through the top 25, and then I'm going to go through the human teams and kind of talk about them. I may look at conferences and just kind of talk through that as well, but I think the top 25, the number one team's probably not shocked to anyone. It's Maryland. Maryland is the top prestige team in the league, and just is a powerhouse. They haven't really played anybody yet, other than Stanford. So they haven't really been tested, I would say. There was some news around Maryland, of course, is uh, star quarterback Marcus Witten, who likely would probably be the number one pick in the WWPF draft, is out. He was hurt in the first game of the year, and Maryland's having to play a backup who's not quite as good. And of course, the miss on Asa Garcia, who's the quarterback at Florida State now in last recruiting cycle, is probably coming back to haunt them. Number 2 is Baylor. This is Houston, Huston, however you want to say it. He hasn't been uploading as much, but he's one of those that normally sets his team up and then lets them run and adjust them as he has time. They are one of the 2 long ball teams in this league. So when I go through the teams, you'll notice Baylor leads in the passing attack. Not a huge shock though, given the fact that they chuck the ball down the field to the very fast wide receivers. But yeah, Baylor's having a pretty good start to the season. Florida, this is SOA. SOA's traditionally in the top 5 around this point. And again, the level of competition's not as high in the beginning. It's probably like real life Florida, but he's got him off to a fast start, and we'll see how that goes. At number 4 is Florida State. This is just sample. He's done a fantastic job with Florida State. Of course, he's got Asa Garcia, who is a starting quarterback, and I think that's helping a little bit. But generally speaking, Florida State's a top 10 team, so it's not too much of a shock to see them here. Oklahoma is a little bit of a shock. Maybe not if you know the coach. So Steve is one of the new coaches. He'd been in the league before, and he's a solid coach. So he's got them off to a fast start. They have, I think, not scored less than 40 points in a game so far, including blowing out a couple teams. They downed LSU, which is one of my teams in the last week in week 3. But he's definitely got him off to a fast start. He seems to incorporate a power rushing attack coupled with long ball. So it'll be important for you as a coach, and I'll probably do a video on this. Is how do you defend against long ball teams? Uh, at face value, they look very hard because they have very speedy receivers, but there are ways to do it. LSU was somewhat successful, but they couldn't stop both the rushing attack and the passing attack, which is maybe what makes Steve's Oklahoma a little bit more dangerous than Baylor, because he can run the ball, and he does. So number 6 is Ohio State. This is DP, but he's still on break, so it's largely the CPU. They're off to a pretty fast start again. UCLA comes in at number 7. They've only played one game. This is Stewart, so I expect them to start moving up the rankings here shortly as they start playing more games. I think he has an off week again this week. Um, Number 8 is no shock to me. This is Georgia. This is Shark. He's a content streamer plus just a really solid coach in both the pro and college game. You see Shark's name pop up a couple times because he's got multiple teams in the top 25. Washington State, of course, is one of my teams, and they largely moved up from 17 because they downed what used to be number 2 Miami, which is Gary's team. Not going to talk a whole lot about them. Houston is Travis, but he's still on break. But again, he's one of those coaches that did a phenomenal job in recruiting when he's available and then just building a system that largely the CPU can have success with. Um, at 11, we have Frankie with his Oklahoma State Cowboys. Frankly, Frankie would probably be higher up if he wasn't moving. So I expect to see Oklahoma State climb. They are one of the top Big 12 teams. He's got some competition with Huston and Steve at Baylor and Oklahoma, and another team we're going to talk about here in a minute in Iowa State. You have Michigan coming in at number 12. This is another Stewart team. This is his heartfelt team. He's a big Michigan fan, so they're off to a really good start. Hopefully, they can keep that going. We'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. Um, 13 is Miami. This is Gary. Gary's Miami is a very good squad. I'm kind of a little shocked that Washington State beat them. But I think that that could be maybe the only loss until they play like Florida State. Wisconsin CPU, not going to talk about them. Texas is a new coach and Kev. Kev's got them off to a pretty good start. If he's anywhere near the planning and thoughtfulness that he shows in WWPF with Baltimore Ravens, I think Texas is going to be another one of those teams in the Big 12 that really compete for that title. Auburn is open. If you want to join this league, I would say Auburn's one of the premier teams along with Clemson that you could come in and take and probably have some success right away. NC State's Van. It's good to see Van uphill with NC State. They have a big game this week with Florida State, which may kind of determine the Atlantic. Again, it's early in the season, so both teams will have a chance to bounce back. I mentioned Iowa State. This is Shark's other team. He streams about this team quite a bit. They were one of the worst teams, and he's already turned them into a powerhouse. Just really had them as a powerhouse in the first season, but they're only getting stronger as the recruiting cycles come through. The rest of the teams are all CPU, so I'm not going to talk through them, but kind of want to look at the conference standings real quick and talk about that, and then I'm going to go into the individual teams. Atlantic Coast, I mentioned this, is really the Atlantic is Florida State versus NC State. We did have Boston College make a run last year. Apparently, Syracuse is inspired and trying to do the same thing. Clemson is a traditional powerhouse, but they just haven't been as strong since Matt left. Miami is, of course, I think the only human controlled team in the Coastal, and really, it's scary to lose. Benjamin Culp is one of the top wide receivers in the league right now, and of course, Gary's got Miami off to a fast recruiting start. He normally does. The game to watch here is Florida State versus NC State, so this is just Sample versus Van. They always have great matchups, so NC State's right now favored to win it. Uh, that one for me is a push. I don't think I could choose which one. And then the only other game involving a human is Miami at Pittsburgh, and also the only real game of consequence. So I like Miami to win that game. In the AAC, really, there's really the main. There are three human coaches here. Pops is at Memphis. Houston is Travis, but he's on break right now. UCF is Cable, who is also the coach of the Giants in WWPF. UCF is the traditional powerhouse along with Houston in this league. I won't be shocked when you get to the end of the season and see Houston versus Central Florida for the conference championship. Central Florida has a fairly hard game this week. South Florida is much better than a record indicates. Unfortunately, they played two of my teams in the beginning weeks. And so that's two of the three losses right there. Houston should have no problem with Tulsa, and Memphis should have no problem with Tulane. The Big 12, I talked about this. There are a lot of human coaches in the Big 12. If you want to join a conference that has a lot of human coaches plus some good teams still available, TCU is a good team. Really, it's TCU. But Baylor, I mentioned earlier, is Houston. Oklahoma, Steve. Iowa State is Shark. Texas is Kev. Oklahoma State is Frankie. BYU is Starfinder. West Virginia is LA Smog. And Texas Tech is a team I've taken over. I took them over last week, and I'm trying some new things that I'm going to do some videos on. Driscoll is the leading quarterback in the SNCFL right now. I think Kenneth Avery is actually the leading rusher in the SNCFL. So a lot of strong competition here. And then I think Blankenship's up there on like the top five. Baylor's off to a pretty fast recruiting start. Don't read into the Texas Tech one. I think he's going to be good, but it's nothing to write home about. He's not. He's a 913 recruit. Uh, Big games this week. Texas versus West Virginia is a very big game. Both LA Smog and Kev have the both two new coaches. They both have really strong teams, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Uh, Starfinder has maybe a chance at beating Shark, but it's not a big one. The talent differential between BYU and Iowa State is pretty pronounced. And Shark, I think, has Iowa State dialed in. I don't think you're going to see Iowa State lose until they start hitting some of the bigger ones. Frankie's got a pretty big task with a really good CPU team in TCU, but I still like Oklahoma State chances in this. Baylor should just really shellac Kansas State. I think Oklahoma's going to do the same thing to Wisconsin. Oklahoma and Baylor are just they're scoring at will at this point. So it's going to take a more of a heavyweight to slow them down. And then Texas Tech, of course, gets Kansas. So um, again, lots of human coaches in this league, so very few CPU teams to talk about, which is always nice. Big Ten, the main teams here are Ohio State with DP, Michigan with Stewart, Maryland with myself, Penn State with Don Lookie, and then on the flip side, you have Iowa and Minnesota. Iowa's Frankie's other team. Minnesota's another team by Starfinder. Uh, it's not really a shock here. The top four teams are the teams I kind of expect to do well in the East. I think Penn State still has some talent differential. Don's a great coach, so if anyone's going to be able to get something out of him, it's him, and he's got them on a good path now. So I think Penn State's going to have a pretty decent season, but the East is really going to be determined between Ohio State, Michigan, and Maryland. Maryland, of course, is the longtime defending champion. And then down in the West, it'll likely be Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. If you're looking for a team here, Michigan State is a really good team. Wisconsin is a really good team. Illinois is a decent team. There's a lot of good teams to be had here. Um, Really, I think Michigan's off to a fast start. LaFleur is someone to keep an eye on. You don't see anybody from Maryland. Maryland's having some injury issues right now. The biggest one being Witten's out, and then they're having some issues with the running backs. But Michigan is just off to a really fantastic start on the defense. Boyles is up there for the lead as a sack leader, and then of course Hampton is one of the top cornerbacks. Big games this week, Maryland versus Penn State. This is always a big game. Maryland should take this one. The talent differential between Maryland and Penn State's pretty pronounced. But again, if someone's going to upset Maryland unexpected, it's probably Don. Michigan State. This should be a pretty easy game for Stewart with his Michigan squad. Michigan State's down this year. Ohio State, Purdue again. Ohio State should easily handle Purdue. Iowa's struggling a little bit right now. As Frankie gets a system in place, they have a really good rushing attack. This one could actually be one of those where Iowa gets upset, but I do think Frankie will pull it out in the end. We talked about Oklahoma, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's one of the few CPU teams I think that may be able to hang with Oklahoma, but I'm not putting a lot of money on that. I think Oklahoma's going to win by at least 3 scores. Uh, Moving on to the Conference USA. I'm not going to linger here long. There's not many human teams in here at all. James Madison's, I think, the only human team, and that's SOA, who are off to a pretty decent start. Marshall's already upset some people, so at the beginning of the season, I would really say that this is traditionally going to be Western Kentucky, but uh, Western Kentucky lost a lot of people to the draft last year, so they may not be as good as they normally are. So this could be the year that the East really gets some dominance back. Marshall's a very good team led by Sean Sparks, but I'm going to move on because there's not much to see here. I'm not going to talk about independence. MAC, it begins and ends with Western Michigan. That's Stewart's third team. They won't be in the MAC much longer. They're actually going to be moving to one of the Power Conferences either next year or the year after. Sorry about that. I needed to take a quick drink of coffee. Um, so I think yeah, so Western Michigan's off to its normal fast start. They will normally run the tables on this division, mostly just because, again, Stewart is one of the more phenomenal coaches in both leagues, actually. So both the pro league and the college league, and despite losing a lot of players to the draft last season, they're still dialed in. I mean, they got Esposito, who's a pretty good defensive end, and then Centron is a really good quarterback. Plus, he has good running backs. They play Northern Illinois this week. I don't think it's going to be that close. I think Western Michigan's going to blow them out. On the flip side, it's anybody's game as to who will go. Traditionally, it's like Akron, but Akron's having a down season. But be careful with that. They haven't really played in conference yet. A lot of the times, these CPU teams end up against the heavyweights of the human teams, and they just get shellacked. But once they get into conference, it's a different story. So again, he'll expect everything. All roads lead through Western Michigan. Colorado State's an interesting one. It's a CPU team. If you want to join this league, I would say take a good hard look at them as well as Boise State. Air Force is, I believe, Don Lucky again. Uh, he's got them off to a quick start. I need to check. I'm only going to check Army for one reason. We'll go back to Independence. I'm just curious about something to see who won the Commander in Chief already. So if Army beats Navy, they win the Commander in Chief. I think they win it regardless, because I think in the end they hold the they win it. They win by advantage, I guess is the easiest way to say it. So, because I know Air Force beat Navy, Army beat Air Force, um, and so I think Army has the chance to win the Commander in Chief, which is only 3 games, but it's something important if you're in the service. Colorado State. And by the way, I what I will say is I follow it because I'm a military brat. I've always followed Army, Navy, and Air Force. So it's just always a point of interest for me. Colorado State is a team to beat still. On the flip side, San Diego State is kind of the powerhouse. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. I do follow New Mexico because I had them for a short bit last season while I was doing some experimenting. They're off to a pretty good start, but the person to kind of keep an eye on is Daniel Radcliffe, who's the running back out of Colorado State. San Diego State's more of a defensive team, but the big matchup this week is probably going to determine who wins the Mountain Division. Is Colorado State versus Air Force. Pac-12, we have quite a few human coaches in this league as well. So Washington State is one of my teams. Stanford is Skelter. Washington is Van again. You got Stewart at UCLA. You got Gary at Arizona State. You got Pops at USC. If you're interested in joining, I would say Cal is a really good team to look at. So is Utah. Uh, Colorado, if you just want to be the next Deion Sanders. So, but Washington State's a little bit of shock at 3-0. They've played two of the three games were against the number two team in the nation. So they knocked off Louisiana Monroe in week one, and then they knocked Miami off in week three. This is a power rushing attack. So there's no secret about what they're going to try to do with you on offense, but it's really their defense that's starting to help them. Stanford's only loss was to Maryland in week one. Skelter's got them on a pretty good path. I think that Stanford's going to have a pretty good season. Washington, they won their week one matchup against LSU, and they've struggled a little bit since then, but they've also been playing some pretty good opponents. So I look for Van to get that righted. He normally struggles maybe a little bit in the beginning of the season, then comes on stronger later in the season. Mentioned Stewart and UCLA before. They are the power in the South. Um, they've only played one game, so it's hard to gauge them, but traditionally UCLA is a really hard team to play. Pops, it's a little shocked to see him with two losses already. I'll have to look and see who he's played. But traditionally, Pops has them up near the top, and they'll probably be, though. Arizona State, Gary's focused a little bit more on Miami right now, so once he focuses back on Arizona State, I expect them to go back to being like maybe the second power or third power in the Pac-12. Rushing attacks dominate a lot of the Pac-12. So Merriman and Willis are both Washington State running backs. Merriman, of course, was last year's leading rusher in the SNCFL. He's like a two-star. Willis is like a is a four-star, but he's getting more carries this year. And then you have Kamal, who is also really good out of Washington. Um, SEC, this is another one of those where there are a lot of good teams available if you want to join. This would be the place to join. There are also some human teams in here. LSU is one of my teams. Louisiana Monroe is Skeletal. Georgia is Shark. Florida is SOA. Tennessee is Udo. So lots of good teams still available though. Texas A&M probably is at the top of that list. Auburn is another one you should look at. Vanderbilt's having an interesting season. They've gotten better year over year under the CPU. With a human coach, it may actually do really well. And of course, marquee one is Alabama. Uh, so Texas A&M probably with Witten hurt probably has maybe someone who could become the number one pick in the WWBF and Barham. He is just a phenomenally good quarterback. It'd be interesting to see what the NARFL does with him, but he's someone to keep an eye on, and Dickens is someone to keep an eye on from a wide receiver. Enrique Bonner is really the reason why Vanderbilt's doing well, along with McLaughlin on the defensive side. But traditionally, I think it's going to be while Louisiana Monroe's at 0-2, they haven't started conference play. I expect to see Louisiana Monroe be competing against Texas A&M for the West title by the end of the season. The East will come down to Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. Um, and I kind of like Georgia in that race, but the dark horse for me is Tennessee. Udo is a really solid coach. We'll see how that goes this week because his big matchup is Louisiana Monroe versus Tennessee. Uh, with Skelter struggling a little bit right now at Louisiana Monroe, it's probably the right time for Udo to potentially sneak one in and get a key win that would help line him up for a run at the East title. LSU gets Mississippi State. LSU's a little bit better than a 1-2 record. They lost to Washington in week one and then beat Clemson, who's ranked, and then held up decently against Oklahoma, but there's just no way they were going to be able to overcome the talent gap and just the speed of Oklahoma. So I like their chances, but they've got a really hard record, so they're just aiming for a winning season again this year. Florida gets Vanderbilt, so we'll see how good Vanderbilt actually is against a really good Florida squad. I still like Florida. Georgia against South Carolina. Uh, South Carolina's a good team, but Georgia should just run over them. And then the other big matchup is Alabama versus Texas A&M. Uh, that should be a really good matchup. But again, if you really want a solid team, probably the best team to get right now is Texas A&M. uh, just as long as you're okay with being an Aggie. Sun Belt, it's Louisiana Lafayette. New Mexico State will hang for a little bit, but all roads lead through Lafayette for this conference. So I'm gonna pivot real quick, and I'm gonna talk about the human teams. Just to give a quick 5 minutes. So I mentioned Air Force's Don. He's off to a really good start. Lost to Army. Army's not a pushover team in this league. Last season in the WWPF draft, they put quite a few people into it. Navy's the same. It's not really a pushover, though a good team as well. Buffalo is a pushover, but I like his chances to be able to make a run and potentially get into the conference championships. I don't know that outside of Colorado State, I really see a team from the Mountain West making it into the playoffs this year. The way this system works is it's the top 16 teams go to the playoffs. There's no automatic burst for conferences. I may change that. I'm still thinking about it, but I'd much rather have the top 16 teams go. From a Buffalo perspective, I'm sorry. So the big games here will be Boise State, Colorado State, and Georgia Tech. Moving on to the next one, Arizona State. Mentioned Gary's not really focused on them right now. Once he focuses on them, they'll do really well. Uh, Bannister's looks like he's a pretty good quarterback, but losing to UNLV is kind of an issue, but losing to Colorado State's not. And they did beat Hawaii, so they've got a decent schedule. They don't get Washington State, they don't get Stanford, so they should be able to get to a winning record and make it to a bowl. I think USC, UCLA are probably going to be losses as well as Ohio State. Washington will be a close game and probably too close to call it. I mentioned Baylor again. This Driscoll's the number one quarterback in the league right now. I think Schumacher's number one wide receiver. I think he has like of the top 5 or 6 receivers, he has like 3 of them, which makes sense because this team is built around the pass. So Mississippi isn't a good team. Virginia Tech's not a good team. Nevada's a decent team, so that's a pretty good result for him. He hasn't really played anybody yet, and probably won't really play anybody until week 7 when he plays Kev. And then, of course, he's got week 9 and week 11, which are Shark and Frankie. Week 5, Texas Tech. I don't expect to be able to keep up with them. I wasn't able to with Oklahoma in LSU, so I'll keep it close, but I don't expect to win that one. So really, those are the major tests for Baylor. If they could get through those tests, they'll make the playoffs. But if you lose like maybe 3 games, you're not going to make the playoffs. So he's got to win those. TCU could sneak up on them and beat them, but again, that passing attack's pretty phenomenal. I'm expecting him to wreak havoc. I think really it's Shark and Frankie that have the best chance. I'm giving Kev the benefit of the doubt because Kev is a good coach. I think he could probably come up with a game plan that would slow him down. And by the way, I am going to do a video on how do you slow down these type of offenses because I'm starting to see them more often. And a lot of people have requested I do more on defense, less on offense. But I will do one on offense as well because I want to talk about the dink and dunk, um, which is a short passing game. BYU is Starfinder. Uh, Again, level of quality of the opponent's not high, but BYU is a recent addition to the Big 12. It's only his second season, I think, at BYU, maybe third. So Starfinder's got him off to a pretty good start. Game one is always hard for every coach because you don't know what you're getting in the opponent and you just have to take a guess. But his first game in the conference is kind of a punch in the nuts. It's kind of high punch with Iowa State. Shark is a really good coach. So if he wins that, he's gonna flip the dynamic of the conference on its head. But it's a tall hill to climb. And then of course he follows it up with TCU, gets Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. It just he's probably got the hardest schedule in the nation this year. Um, it's just brutal, especially that um, just that next 5 weeks is just going to be really harsh. And if he comes through it relatively unscathed, I think he's got a good chance of making it into the playoffs. Central Florida, the Michigan State game was a little bit of a hiccup for Cable, but I don't expect him to have many more until he gets to week 11 against Houston. Cincinnati's a team to always watch. They have a lot of talent. They recruit well as a CPU team. But really, it'll be week 11. It'll probably be a foreshadowing of the conference championship. Jankowski is just yet another quarterback in a long line of really good quarterbacks at UCF. Chisholm is a good defensive end. So this one should be interesting to see. Cable's a good coach, and I fully expect him to have a pretty good season. Moving along, talk about SOA in Florida. Again, I mentioned this. Navy is probably his biggest game so far. I got to fix the James Madison thing. I don't like when coaches play against the other teams, and that's on me. That's not on him. But as you can see, his defense is really strong this year, which makes sense. His offense is not as strong, but having a strong defense in the SEC is probably a must. The games to watch is, of course, week 4 against Vanderbilt. I don't like Auburn's chances against Florida. They're CPU, and unless a human coach comes in, I think so will get that. Really, it's week 7 when he goes to Georgia against Shark that will define who likely will have the driver's seat for the East. I'm sorry, the West. It's the East. It doesn't matter. Um, so Tennessee, of course, is another big one in week 11, and then he's got just Sample in week 15. So Shark should, I'm sorry, Soa should make it into the playoffs. He normally does. Just Sample, the big matchups for him this season are going to really be in week 4 and week 6. Week 4, if he wins that, he's got a pretty good chance of making it to the ACC Conference Championship, where the week 6 game will likely be a foreshadowing of that, because I don't see anybody knocking Miami off. And then after that, of course, Clemson's beatable, as was proven by LSU. Georgia Tech is a good team, but not quite on the level of Florida State. As I mentioned, Asa Garcia, he's just phenomenal. It still stings that I didn't get him last cycle, but he's lights out a really, really good quarterback. This is a guy, I mean, just look at it. He's elite, and he's got good speed to boot. It's just, there's a lot to like about this guy. And he's got a good personality. So I do think that Ace is going to be someone we watch, and over the next few seasons, he's going to line himself up well for WWPF draft, where he could be the number one. Um, Georgia mentioned this is Shark. Shark may have not have played anybody yet, but he's already dominating. I don't think he has any major injuries right now, so he's coming out of non-conference play pretty strong. Um, Victor Noah is just someone to keep an eye on, as is Victor King. So the battle of the victors are someone to keep an eye on. And he's got a really favorable schedule this season. Florida uh, is really the main challenger along with Tennessee. He could easily go undefeated this year and make it into the SEC title game where he hasn't lost a game. That Florida game will be a really big test for him, as will Udo in week 13. I think that's the game I actually like, where we may see that Georgia loses, because it's at Tennessee, and Udo is typically really good in big games. Again, skip over Houston. Iowa State is another one of Sharks' teams. Uh, they're a 49 prestige team who plays like an 80 prestige team. So kudos to Shark. He's done videos on this. He's really got them competitive fast. They score a lot of points. They do it through the rushing game, and then they play some really good defense. So I do like Iowa State in the race for the Big 12. I think the biggest challenge I have is they pulled one of the harder schedules where they get Oklahoma on the road. They get Baylor on the road. They get Oklahoma State on the road. They get Louisiana Monroe on the road. So at some point, that's going to cause a slip. But I do expect them to make the playoffs. They may not win the conference though. But again, once in the playoffs, Shark is going to be pretty dangerous. Uh, we talked about James Madison. I'm not going to go in great detail because I'm not sure Soa's uploading with them right now, but they have a pretty favorable schedule to making it to the title game, and they've got some good pieces to do it. Um, so I really like Demers, who's the running back. They have a good rushing defense too. So we'll see, but I do think that they have a favorable schedule to make it into the championship game. And if he uploads, I think that they'll have even better chance. This is kind of the shock of the season, candidly. And I say that because Louisiana Monroe is a team that doesn't lose often. The fact that they've lost twice, losing to Marshall, was a really big upset. You could chalk Washington State up as it's just two coaches who have played each other lots of times, playing against each other, and Washington State got the luck of the draw or the bounce of the ball, if you will. I don't expect them to lose many more games. I think that Skelton will right the ship. One of the problems he's having is on offense. In the past, Louisiana Monroe was known for its rushing attack. They've changed their identity a little bit, and I think that there's a little bit of that going on right now. Plus, I don't know if I think some of the challenges in the rushing game may be hurting them a little bit. Definitely their ability to stop the run has hurt them. I think both Marshall and Washington State came at them pretty hard on the ground, and were able to slow the game down to keep it close and then win it in the end. They do have a good free safety coming in. I hate that he recruits so well in Louisiana because I have LSU, and a lot of these guys are guys I want to go after, but I see that Skelter's on them and I just back off. So again, big key matchup this week. If he beats Tennessee, he's back on track, and then really won't have another major game until he takes on Texas A&M in Week 9. Auburn has been a little bit of a sticking point for him, but I expect him to get past because they're now CPU. Then the next big game will be in Week 13. If he gets back on track, he should make the playoffs relatively easy. Um, he's got a very favorable schedule for it. LSU, this is my third team. Uh, they were pretty weak. They're coming back now. The prestige wasn't as low as Iowa State, but the overall level of the players sucked. It was actually worse than Iowa State. So this is, I think, year 3 or year 4 of the experiment, and they're getting better. I think my problem is probably should not have started my 1-star quarterback in week 1. I'm now playing a 3-star in Quentin Bach, uh, who's turning out to be just a phenomenal quarterback. Ladarius Munez is a former quarterback who I moved to running back this season, mostly because Johnny Jansen can't stay healthy. And I need to have a good running back. So, mentioned they beat Clemson. Oklahoma, they actually did a pretty good job in stopping the passing attack. It's just I think Oklahoma's quarterback went like 9 of 20, but it was those 9 passes that hurt uh, LSU. So, I expect them to make it to a bowl. That's all I'm aiming for. Their schedule is not very conducive to anything but that. Texas A&M is probably going to beat them. ULM will probably beat them. I should get Auburn easily in Alabama, but that's enough to knock me out of the race, and I'm not expecting to win the conference for another year or two. Maryland, again, this is the premier team in the SNCFL, but they're struggling a little bit because of the injury at quarterback. They also are struggling a little bit in the rushing game because they have a bunch of freshman running backs who are trying to contribute. But their strength really is in the receiver core. They have one of the best receiving cores in the game with Bittner and Allard. But they definitely want to get Marcus Witten back. I really hate that Skeldor and his goons and Stanford stomped on his toes. I'm hoping that he gets out of questionable in the next week or two, especially before I go to Indiana or have to get to week 9 to face Michigan. Week 9 and week 10 will really determine whether Maryland wins big uh, the Big Ten East. Kev at week 12 is a game I'm watching because I do think Kev is a good coach and it'll be interesting to see. So, going to move on past them. Miami, uh, again, Miami had a good start to the season. They are racking up the yards mostly through the rushing game. They have a solid defense. Washington State just was able to control the ball and get some key takeaways, and that's how they downed Miami. But Miami was the number 2 team in the nation at the time. But I think that's outside of the week 6 matchup with just Sample at Florida State. I don't see anybody really getting in Miami's way. Jesse Payne is another good quarterback, but keep an eye on Benjamin Culp. I think he's only like a sophomore, so he's got a couple more really good seasons ahead of him. This is Stewart's love of his life in Michigan, and unfortunately, his love treats him very badly at times. This is probably one of the best starts that Michigan's had in a while. Of course, once they get into conference play, that's where it gets a little tougher. The Week 6 matchup at Wisconsin will give Stewart an idea of how the season's going to go. But really, he's really got probably circled 2 games. Week 9 where he has to travel to Maryland. Um, and then week 15, Ohio State. Anybody who's a true Michigan fan, that's really the game of the year. But I think Maryland is becoming the obsession for him at this point because in order to win the Big Ten East, you got to get past Maryland. And I do like this team to be able to do it. I think he's got a very diversified team this year, and I think that this may be the year that he does it. So, Minnesota Starfinder, again, pretty hard opening. Both Pittsburgh and Iowa State are good teams. He did down Wyoming. The schedule is conducive to a very good run for Minnesota if Starfinder can put it together. He's got a good quarterback in Ackerman. He's got to start strong with Michigan State, and then he's got to get past Iowa in week 7. If he does those things, I like his chances. Week 15 against Wisconsin will probably be one of those games that help determine the West in the Big Ten. NC State, Van always does a great job. Van is actually one of my favorite coaches. And it goes back to Bowl Bound. He was in Bowl Bound for a while. He's always got a great attitude. He's just a phenomenal coach. And I like what he's done at NC State. I still remember from Bowl Bound when he beat Maryland in its prime in WWCF. And it was a major upset, and that was when he arrived. I think some injuries are starting to kind of hurt him a little bit, but he's got a really good running back in Emerson. Right now, they lead the nation in rushing. That may not hold up because as Washington State gets out of its really hard first 3 games, they may start exploding for 400 yards a game like they normally do. But the other thing to keep an eye on here is that defense is particularly nasty at NC State. So he's doing a really good job there. Ferguson with the sacks, Gonzalez with the INTs. It'll be interesting to see if he gets past just Sample this week. He could make a really, really strong run. This is a team that I think actually will make the playoffs. And I'm hoping they do because I think that there's a lot of potential here for a really special season for them. Steve is a new coach. Well, let me rephrase. He's been in SNCFL before. He was at Nebraska, and when he was at Nebraska, I considered him to be a really strong coach. His start here is particularly strong. He's really differentiating himself as a coach. I think the challenge with Oklahoma for any team playing them is it's really hard to play a team that can do multiple things well. So he can run the ball really well, as he showed against LSU, when LSU was like, I'm just going to take the passing game from you. Uh, but he can also throw the ball really well, as you saw in the Fresno State game. Felder is a really good quarterback, and he's an underclassman, so he's going to be around for a while. Avery's a strong running back. Trevino is going to create matchups for almost everybody, and he's got some really fast wide receivers that will create matchup issues. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. He gets a good test this week at week with Wisconsin. Uh, Iowa State really will be the bellwether for me about how Steve's going to do with Oklahoma. I worry about Iowa State only for the fact that I don't think that they can keep up with his fast wide receivers and his ability to change it up on you with between the rushing and passing game. But if there's a coach that's going to beat him on his schedule, it's either going to be Shark with Iowa State. Uh, I think him and LA Smog are friends at West Virginia, so that could be an interesting game. Or it'll be week 15 when he takes on Frankie with Oklahoma State, who has a nasty defense. Um, Frankie's off to a good start despite the move that he's going through right now. So he's got a really good rushing defense, a really good rushing offense at second in the SNCFL. Uh, Someone could say, well, he hasn't really played anyone, but his defense is playing well, his rushing attack's going well. McDougal's the guy to keep an eye on. He'll get a good test this week with Texas Christian on the road, but then he's not going to really get tested again until week 8 through week 12. Really, starting in week 8, he's going to get tested every week. So Kev is a good coach. I think Alex Smog is a good coach. Shark's a good coach. Huston is right now the team to beat. And then he gets Skelter at Stanford, and then he'll end with Steve at Oklahoma. So it's going to be a rough season for him, but if he comes through those games undefeated, he's probably going to win the national championship. Penn State, we mentioned this is Don Lucky. It's never a bad thing when you lose to NC State. And he followed it up quickly with beating Georgia Tech, who was ranked higher than 25, actually. Cincinnati is probably one of the more solid teams in the league. For Don, he's finally got the pieces I think that he needed to have in order to compete. When he took over Penn State, they were just an absolute mess. And it's taken a couple seasons to get them right, and he's done a really phenomenal job there with getting them right. So keep an eye on Rigoberto Wood. He's a pretty good quarterback. I think opening your Big Ten play against Maryland is always tough, but he's beat me before. So I always approach the game with Don where I will game plan the hell out of it because I don't look past him ever. The only person I think, the only three coaches I probably game plan more than Don. And Don's probably watching this saying, hey, don't game plan for me. You win, so just look past me. I just can't because I know how good of a coach he is, and I'm going to try to avoid that. I hate losing, by the way. So uh, I don't mind losing to better coaches, and when I lose to Don, it doesn't bother me, but just losing in general bothers me. Stanford, this is Skeletor. Again, they lost to Maryland in week 1. It was a competitive game. And then they followed it up with 2 solid wins after that. Their schedule is actually very conducive to them winning the North. They only have Washington State. They don't get UCLA. And they don't get the other powerhouses over in the South. The Week 12 game against Oklahoma State should be fun. Frankie and Skelter are longtime friends, and the back and forth should be fun to watch. But he's doing it on the ground that is a staple for Skelter, and he is easily one of the best coaches in the league. So I do expect Stanford to slowly start to whittle away at Washington State's reign of the North titles that they've had. I mentioned Tennessee's Udo. Udo lost to Old Dominion in week 1. I think that just was a week 1 matchup. Again, week 1 is really hard because you know nothing about the team you're playing unless you play them every year. He bounced back with wins over Nebraska and Syracuse. He's got a good test this week with Louisiana Monroe. Probably won't get tested again until week 11. And then, of course, has week 13 with Georgia. Um, I like them. I think that they're a dark horse to take the title. Keep an eye on Kevin Hatfield. Daniel Hughes is off to a really good start as a defensive end. Uh, and Frederick Underwood should do pretty well. But I do like the rushing attack, and I do think Udo's going to be able to translate that into wins. I don't know if there'll be a playoff team. It'll be interesting to see how that would go. But I think he's going to be right there, near the cusp of making the playoffs. Texas is hard because Kev is an unknown. I will say I like what I see so far. Uh, North Carolina's not an easy win. The other two are relatively easy wins. So we'll see how he does this week against LA Smog. But for me, the that week 6 through 8 is really week 6 through 9 is pretty brutal, and then of course you get Maryland in week 12. So at least he's not starting his Big 12 journey with a punch to the nuts from one of the heavyweights. But I like Kev's chances. I mean, I've said it before in WWPF, he's already impressed me with how he's drafted and how he's building his team. I like Norris Goldman. He was someone I liked last season. Alan Blankenship, he's really using the run really effectively. And I think in the Big 12, if you can stop the run, you're going to have a chance. But again, his season's going to be defined about how he stops Baylor. Uh, a good note, even though it looks like a brutal schedule, at least he doesn't have Oklahoma on it too. That would have probably just made it ungodly for his first season. But keep an eye on Texas. They are a team that if they get through that week 6 through 9 with only one loss, they probably are going to compete for one of the two spots at the Big 12. And the Big 12 is different since those not divisions. It's the top two teams that go. I'll do a video on Texas Tech. I took them over; they're a complete mess. I've had to move people around to get them into even a working state. They're also a poster child for when the CPU decides to put everybody at 26 in training and you burn out the whole team. I think I had like 8 people. Maybe when I started, I had like 10 who were questionable due to fatigue. Now they're probable. So I backed the training off. Just general thing is if you're ever in that situation where you've overexerted them, back down to 20 or back down to 19. It allows them to recover faster instead of going down to 22. I'm back up at 22 because I got enough people off of questionable. But if that happens, you take over a team and they're at 24, 25, or 26. By the way, never go over 22. You need to back it down to 20 quickly. So that way you can get them to start healing and get out of the fatigue. I don't like Texas. Texas Tech's main goal this year is to get to a bowl. That's it. I'm not looking to compete in the Big 12. I don't have the quarterback to do it. I do have the running backs, but I've moved a lot of people around. I think I moved a running back to tight end. I moved a bunch of people around on defense. I'm going to do a video about why I did that and how you can use that as a method to get a team competitive really fast. I think Shark's done one too. And that's how he was able to make Iowa State go pretty fast. I am recruiting very specifically for this team because there are some gaps I have that I've got to fix relatively quick, which is again why I was moving people around because I wanted to create shortages in certain positions so that way I could recruit against those shortages. UCLA, we've talked about them. This is Stewart's second team, probably his more successful team. But week 4 matchup with Pops at USC, that's going to be an interesting game. But his real test will come in week 7. And then after that, he doesn't really have a test. So if he gets past week 7 undefeated, UCLA is going to go undefeated. Probably will run into either Washington State or Stanford in the conference championships, and that should be interesting. Washington State and UCLA have been meeting 2 to 3 times a season for a while now. Where one of them wins the first game and then the other one wins the conference. So it'll be interesting to see. I do like Scholl. I think he's going to be a WWPF top rounder. Richard Harper's another guy to keep an eye on. And again, remember, they've only played one game, so Their stats look low, but they're not really low because it's only one game. He has a very strong running attack. His defense is always something to worry about because he's good at shutting people down. I don't know that Pops has uploaded as much. Cincinnati's always a hard game. Rutgers is actually a hard game too. I play Rutgers every year at the end of the season with Maryland. Starting with UCLA is never fun. Then you get Stanford in week 6, and then get Washington State in week 9. That's not a good schedule. That takes you through the heavyweights of the division. Plus, you also have Arizona State. So if Gary suddenly starts working on them, you got to worry about that. They do have a good quarterback in Roger Deal. They have good wide receivers like John Angle. So Pops has all the right things in place. His defense is struggling a little bit this year, but I also am not sure that he's uploaded. So he may be taking a little bit of a break, which is fairly common in the league, and I don't shut people down immediately when they do that. Washington, this is Van. Started the season on a high with a win against LSU. Boston College is a hard team, so is Nebraska. Um, I he'll get this righted fast. He has the right components for a very strong rushing attack. His defense, especially his pass defense, is really strong. I think the challenge that he's running into is running up against rushing teams. It's not going to get any easier. Stanford's a rushing team, but Cal, Oregon, Oregon State, Colorado, Utah, I think are all passing teams. He won't really see another major rushing team outside of Stanford until he gets to week 15 against Washington State. This is a team that's overachieving in Washington State. Didn't expect them to be 3-0 at this point. I expected them to be 1-2. So they knocked off Louisiana Monroe in week 1, beat a pretty good South Florida team in week 2, and then really had a good game against Florida, Miami, Florida. Definitely didn't expect them to win that. Um, Rotation of running backs is huge for them. It shows forth, but bear in mind they've played probably two of the stouter run defenses in Louisiana, Monroe, and Miami, Florida. So they won't run into another good run defense until week 7. So they may shoot up to number 1 again. This is a team that every year has won the rushing title. They are custom built for the run. And even though you know they're going to run the ball at you, it's really hard to stop them. Just because they have a plethora of running backs. So Willis is a leading rusher. Merriman was the leading rusher last year for the whole league. They also have Colburn in there who gives a good change of pace. There's some games where they have 3 running backs who are over 150 yards. It's just that type of rushing attack. And no, I don't run the wishbone. They run out of a traditional set. It's just I rotate the running backs, and they've done a really good job. The defense is still struggling pretty bad. I've got to work on that this season to get them better. West Virginia, we mentioned this is LA Smog. He's opened against Auburn. That's a tough first game to always have, but he bounced back in the next 2 weeks with wins. Worley's a guy to keep an eye on. I like him as a quarterback, but he's definitely doing well with the defense. I think injuries are going to be interesting because I think Lucio Avelos was a decent running back. Um, Injuries can quickly derail a team very fast, but he opens against Texas, so it's a battle of the new coaches. And then again, doesn't really have a big matchup till week 8 through 10. And then week 12, of course, is probably the biggest matchup for West Virginia and Oklahoma. Western Michigan, we talked about this. This is stored. They're probably going to go undefeated. They'll go undefeated and then pull Washington State or Maryland in the playoffs, and then that'll just be an interesting game. This is a team that will move next season or the season after, but just a phenomenal rushing attack and a very stout defense. This is a team to keep an eye on. I definitely love what Stewart's done with them. Uh, I'll just quickly show this. No one really cares about the power ratings. What am I looking for? I think it'll show the awards. So right now, what we're looking at is for the Heisman, Thomas Driscoll. He's got a really good chance of winning it. I mean, he's thrown 19 touchdowns and only 1 interception. Kenneth Avery may very well be up there, but you may start seeing Washington State, Washington, and UCLA running backs starting to creep up. On the defensive side, I will say unless Carman has a major issue, the only person that's probably can catch him is Boyles. Um, he's just off to a fantastic start. I do like Driscoll and Feldel for the Davy O'Brien. For the Blitnikoff, I think Timothy Greenwood is someone that's going to be up there, but it's really going to come down to one of the Baylor wide receivers. Schumacher's got it right now, but Desamon could be the other guy. Um, Lineman, this one's too hard to tell. I will say just based on Baylor's offense that Lopez has a pretty good chance of winning this one, only because they throw the ball a lot, and it's going to allow for Lopez to keep getting pancakes. Uh, Linebacker wise, too early to tell. I do like Roush, but at the same time, Colorado State's linebackers have done pretty well in this category. For the again, I think it's going to be Driscoll. I also like Felder in this. I think Felder's going to creep up the charts. Witten would have probably been uphill, but again, I don't think he's going to be able to creep up because he's going to have probably have missed 3 to 4 games by the time he gets back on the field. Um, Running back wise, this one, what you see now probably is not what you're going to see at the end of the year. Avery probably will be there, Blankenship will be up there, but I think what's missing from this is the Washington State running backs. They traditionally have owned this category, so it'll be interesting to see if Avery and Blankenship can hold off them. I mentioned Barham. I think Barham is going to probably be the top quarterback in this year's draft. Uh, he doesn't throw as many interceptions as Witten does, and if we click on him, you'll see why I think that. He's got an elite arm, and he's got really good intelligence and knowledge of his position. Plus, he's a good person. Uh, so I like him as a whole. I don't think Rojas is going to be up though. Rojas is he's decent, but um, I think he's going to get nerfed a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see. Frankie's made some changes to the formula. For the Mackey, I too early to tell. Uh, I think this is a Tracy Rock award. I think it's Eddie Carmen. I don't see anyone catching him, by the way. Same with Joe Hampton. I think Joe Hampton's probably going to have a really good season. Ohio State has some really good defensive backs. Kickers and punters, no offense, but I'm not going to cover that. So I think what we're seeing already is recruiting wise, a couple teams are off to a fast start. Alabama's probably one of them. Miami's one of them. Baylor's one of them. But the biggest recruits haven't signed yet. So over the next probably 4 sims, we'll start to get an idea who's going to be number one. I don't think Maryland's going to be up there. They don't have that many scholarships this season. But I think that there are a couple other of the bigger teams that do. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Um, but that's kind of where we're at in week 3. If you want to join, definitely feel free to. It's a great league with some great coaches. I think you definitely would enjoy it. I'll put the links in the video, but the next video I'll probably do will probably be week 6. I am going to do a video on Texas Tech. It's going to focus really on how to take over a team. I did one of these about a year or two ago, but I'm going to change it up a little bit and talk about some new techniques I'm trying. And then we can see how it plays out at Texas Tech. I don't think I've ever moved players like I'm moving them right now. And again, I've installed a dink and dunk offense there that's relatively different than anything I've ever done. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I also would encourage you to look for Sharks videos. If you come to our Slack channel, he does post them. He also posts them on Wolverine Studios main site for their content and on our Slack. They're great educational videos. You'll learn a lot. Shark has an amazing grasp of the game. So it's great to see him out there doing that. And I think some other coaches have started to do that. So I'll keep an eye on that and let you know who they are as well. But it's great to have a great active community, and we have that here at SimNation. So if you want to join a community that's highly active on its Slack and that does content, this is a great community for you. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now, but thank you for your time today and have a great rest of the weekend.